Hello everyone and welcome! Every major place in Runeterra has to have a good introduction. Without knowing the place, we don't have a context for the stories of our champions. That's why we are going to have a look at a Noxian story called The Principles of Strength. My name is Alisa Roshka Gloriana Vallocan. For almost 2 millennia, my ancestors ruled the Delverhold as kings. Warlords, nations, and would-be empires sought to overthrow us, jealous of the wealth the Iron Spike Mountains offered up to us, but none could breach our fortress. They broke against our walls like ocean waves, and fell back from the doom of our blades. All of them failed. Until Noxus came. And then, my family were kings no more. She held her head high as they climbed the stairs of triumph. Livered guards stood sentinel every 12 steps, but her flinty gaze was locked forward, unwavering. This might have been Alisa's first time in the capital, but she refused to be overawed. She would not gawk like some provincial lowborn. She was of the Delverhold, and the blood of kings flowed through her veins. The steps were flanked by guards clad in dark steel. The ore used in the forging of their armor came from the depths below her mountain home. All the best plate in Noxus started there, deep under the mountains. For 5 generations, ever since her realm had been conquered by Noxus and incorporated into the Empire, it had been so. Red banners rippled in the evening's dry wind as they ascended. The scent of coal fire and industry wafted upon that hot breeze. In Noxus, the forges rarely cooled. The immortal bastion loomed before them, dark and threatening. They flaunt their wealth and decadence, while we live as paupers, said her brother, Orem. She looked askance at him striding beside her. Orem Arkan Vallocan, broad-shouldered, strong of arm, and undeniably skilled with a blade. He was also arrogant and limited of mind, in Alisa's opinion. But she kept her disdain concealed behind an impassive, unexpressive mask. He was her elder, if only by a matter of minutes, and was only 2 steps removed from ruling the Delverhold himself. Alisa was well aware of her place. Outwardly, the fact they were twins was obvious. Both were tall and athletic in stature, and each had cold eyes of the family line, as well as the proud demeanor of those born to nobility. Both wore their long black hair bound artfully in tight braids. They each bore angular facial tattoos, and wore shale grey cloaks over their armor. They reached the top of the stairs. There was a flutter of wings, and a raven flew low over their heads. Alisa almost flinched but caught herself. Should we consider that an ill omen, brother? She saw Orem's hands turn to fists. Too long have we filled the coffers of Noxus and armored its soldiers. He snarled, making only the barest pretense in keeping his voice out of the earshot of the guards. And for what? For survival, Alisa thought, though she didn't speak it out loud. A pair of warriors clad in full plate awaited them outside the great metal doors of the palace. They stood to attention, heavy axe-headed halberds gripped in their gauntlets. The 3 indentations in their breastplates and their dark red cloaks and tabards informed Alisa these were no regular guards. Legionnaires, breathed Orem, his usual bluster and arrogance forgotten. In a nation of killers, the elite Triforian Legion was feared and respected above all, by both friend and foe alike. It was said that their mere presence had seen cities and nations take the knee, rather than face them in battle. They honor us, Alisa said. Come, brother, it's time we meet this so-called Council of 3 for ourselves. The first thing anyone saw as they entered the audience chamber was the throne of the old Noxian emperors. It was an immense thing, carved of obsidian, blunt and angular, and the innumerable hanging banners, sharply angled pillars, and the burning sconces all worked to direct the eye back toward it. It dominated the space entirely. The throne sat empty, however, as it had since the previous Grand General of Noxus had died. Not died, Alisa corrected herself. Been executed. No emperor for Noxus. No tyrant upon the throne. Not any longer. Before she'd left the Delverhold, Alisa had been counseled regarding the new leadership. The Trifarix, her father's chief advisor, had named it. 3 together, each representing one of the core principles of strength: vision, might, and guile. The theory is where a single individual could doom Noxus through incompetence, madness, or corruption. Now there will always be 2 others to hold any rogue third accountable. To Alyssa, this was an intriguing concept, but one that remained untested in practice. The chamber felt cavernous, large enough to house over 1,000 petitioners, but at this moment it was empty, other than the 3 figures that sat at the simple table of marbled stone at the foot of the throne's raised platform. The 2 grim unspeaking warriors of the Trifarian Legion escorted Alyssa and her brother toward the trio, their footfalls echoing sharply upon the cold floor. The 3 were deep in discussion, but they ceased their talk as the siblings of the Delverhold came towards them. They were seated in a row, facing the approaching envoys like a silent panel of judgment. 2 of them she knew by reputation. The third, well, no one knew anything really. In the center, keen-eyed and unblinking, sat Jericho Swain, the renowned visionary, the new Grand General. Some among the noble houses still called him Usurper, since it was he who had dragged the madman Borem Darkwill from the throne of Noxus. But none of them said it to his face. His gaze, which seemed to see too much, bore first into Orem, then Alyssa. She resisted the urge to stare at the sleeve of his left arm, tucked within his dark coat. It was said that he has lost the limb during the failed invasion of Ionia, severed by some blade witch of that Fey archipelago. To his right sat Darius, the legendary Hand of Noxus, leader of the elite Triforian Legion, and now commander of all the Empire's armies. He was the embodiment of might itself. Where Swain sat rightly upright, Darius slouched back, the fingers of one gauntleted hand drumming a steady tattoo upon the wooden armrest of his chair. His arms were massive, his expression hard. The third figure, only ever referred to as the Faceless, was a mystery. This individual sat unmoving, bedecked from head to toe in many-layered voluminous robe. They wore blank, staring, glossy black mask, and even the eye holes were obscured with dark mesh, giving away nothing to their identity. Their hands too were concealed, hidden in sleeves of thick fabric. Alyssa thought she perceived a vaguely feminine aspect to the mask, but that might simply have been the way it happened to catch the light. A barely perceptible inclination of the chin from Darius dismissed the legionnaires that had escorted them in. The 2 warriors slammed their armored fists into their breastplates in salute, and retreated a half a dozen steps, leaving Alyssa and her brother alone before the Triforix.
"Sit, please,"
said Swain, indicating to the chairs opposite.
"I prefer to stand, Grand General,"
replied Orem.
"As you wish."
There was something undeniably threatening and predatory about the Grand General, Alyssa decided, considering he was a cripple heading into his twilight years.
Orem and Alyssa Valloken, 3rd and 4th born children of the governor of the Delverhold.
He continued.
"It's a long journey from the Iron Spike Mountains. I take it this is not a social visit. I came bearing the seal of my father,"
said Orem,
"to speak in his name." "Get on with it then,"
said Darius, his voice the warning growl of a merkwolf.
"No ceremony. This is Noxus, not some noble court."
His accent was rough and earthly, not cultured like Swain's. The voice of a commoner. Alyssa could almost feel her brother's sneer.
"For decades, the Delverhold had served loyally,"
Orem began, emphasizing the nobility of his own accent, perhaps in an unwise show of superiority.
"Our gold feeds the campaigns of conquest. Our ironclads and arms the warbands of the Empire, the Trifarian Legion too."
Darius remained unimpressed.
"Iron Spike ore makes the best armor. I would not have the Legion protected in anything else. You should be proud."
"We are proud, my lord," said Alyssa.
"I'm no lord, especially not yours."
Swain smiled, raising his hand.
"What he means to say is, in Noxus, no man or woman is born superior to another. It is not by bloodline that one earns their place, but by their deeds."
"Of course," Alyssa demurred, cursing herself inwardly for her mistake.
"We toil like slaves in the darkness of the deep mines below the mountains,"
Orem went on.
"And every day we watch as the fruits of our labor are taken away from us in great wagon trains and come back empty. We are scarcely able to feed our—"
"Oh really?" Swain exclaimed, raising an eyebrow.
Please, show me your palms. What?
Said Orem, taken back.
Show us your hands, boy,
said Darius, leaning on the polished surface of the table between them.
Show us these hands that toil the rock and dust and darkness beneath your mountain fortress.
Orem squared his jaw, refusing to be drawn. Darius scoffed.
Never struggled a day in his life, this one. Her neither. The only caluses you two possess certainly didn't come from hard work.
I will not be spoken to in such a manner by... Orem began, but Alisa placed a placating hand upon his shoulder. He angrily shrugged it off, but wisely chose not to finish the thought.
The mountains are being bled dry,
he said, his voice more measured.
It is unsustainable, and that is not good for anyone, not for us, and certainly not for the armies of Noxus. There must be concession. Tell me, Orem Arkan Vallokan,
said Swain.
How many warriors does the Delverhold send out to fight for Noxus? Approximately, annually.
None, sir, but that is by the by. Our people serve better working the mines and guarding the northern frontiers from barbarian attack. This is where our chief value to Noxus lies. Swain sighed.
Of all the provinces, city-states and nations that submit to Noxus, the Delverhold stands alone in providing no soldiers to join our war hosts. You do not bleed for Noxus. You have never bled for Noxus. Is that not concession enough?
It is not, Orem replied curtly. We have come at our father's behest to renegotiate our ties, or the Delverhold will have no option but to reconsider its place within the Noxian Empire. The room had become very still. Even Darius had ceased the incessant tapping of his fingers. Alisa's face drained of color and stared at her brother in horror. It was a turn she had not been privy to, and her mind reeled at its implications. The Faceless continued to gaze levelly at her from behind that glossy mask.
I see,
said Swain finally.
I believe I know your father's real purpose in sending the two of you here. But the question is, do you?
Orem nodded to Alisa.
Show them,
he ordered, his eyes flashing in anger. She took a deep breath and brought forth a scroll case. Unhooking its end with trembling fingers, she slid free an old shaft of parchment, covered in intricate angular writing of Noxian. It bore both the seal of the Delverhold and the blood-red crest of Noxus. She placed it up on the table and smoothed it flat before standing back at her brother's side, although half a step behind, as was her place, according to Iron Spike customs. Darius appeared disinterested, but both Swain and the Faceless leaned forward to look upon the document. Once again, Alisa found herself trying to get any sense of who it was that hid behind the mask.
When the Delverhold submitted to Noxian rule 87 years ago,
said Orem,
our ancestors gave up their sovereign rights and bowed before the throne of Noxus. The very throne I see before me now, empty.
Darius growled at him.
And? The terms are clear, as you can see for yourself as to where we pledged our allegiance. The last man to sit on that throne died a little over 7 years ago,
said Orem, gesturing up at the dais.
As far as our father is concerned, this piece of paper is now worthless. The Delverhold is under no obligation to continue to pay their tithes at all, but has continued to do so as an act of good faith. However, if our concessions are not met, the Delverhold will be forced to extricate itself from the Empire. The Iron Spike region will no longer be under our imminent protection.
Alisa wanted to look away, wanted to run, but found herself rooted at the spot as she waited for the reaction of the council.
History only remembers the victors,
Darius warned them.
Stand with Noxus and be remembered forever. Stand against us and you will be crushed and forgotten.
No army has ever breached the Delverhold, said Orem.
Our forefathers opened the gates to Noxus willingly, remember. No blood was spilled. You're playing a dangerous game, boy.
Darius pointed to the warriors standing few paces behind Alisa and Orem.
Just 2 of the Trifarian Legion could walk in and take your precious Delverhold. I wouldn't even trouble myself to go with them.
As if to empathize his point, the 2 legionnaires slammed the butts of their halberds into the floor, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. Orem scoffed at the display, but Darius's confidence struck Alisa. He did not seem to be a man to make idle boasts.
Enough,
said Swain with a wave of his hand.
Let us hear what these concessions would entail.
The silver moon had passed the zenith in the night sky overhead by the time Alyssa and Orem left the palace. They began making their way towards the nearby estate that served as their base of operations within the capital. Alyssa was quiet and brooding, her stomach as a tight knot of unease, but her brother seemed energized by the encounter with the rulers of Noxus.
Swain will agree to our terms, I'm sure of it.
He gushed. He knows the Delverhold is too important to the Empire to allow Father to close its gates.
This is madness.
Alyssa muttered. We walk in there and you threaten them? What was your plan?
That was Father's plan.
Why didn't you tell me? Would you have agreed to it had you known?
Of course not,
Alyssa replied. This is fool's errand. We may just as well have offered ourselves for the next fleshing. If Swain is convinced, we only need one of the others to join him for them to concede to our terms, said Orem, seeming not to hear her concerns. That is how the Triferix works. Their leadership cannot be deadlocked, when only two of them need to agree on anything to get it done.
Darius will never agree. Darius is an arrogant dog.
He thinks he could send 2 men to take the Delverhold?
But I fear you are right.
While he objects, that leaves only the Faceless. Our future prosperity lies within the vote of whoever is behind that mask.
Then there is nothing more to do but wait to hear what our fates will be,
said Alyssa, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Orem's eyes gleamed dangerously. Not necessarily. The knot in Alyssa's stomach tightened a little more as he began to explain. Dawn was still several hours away, but Alyssa was already uncomfortably warm as she made her way swiftly and quietly through the streets of the capital. At the head of a contingent of Delverguard, she wore a tight-fitting helm of dark steel, and already she could feel her hair dampening with sweat beneath it. There were a dozen of them in all, cloaked and hooded over their armor. All carried heavy crossbows, with blades strapped to their waists. In this city, it was not at all unusual to see armored warbands from all across the Empire. If anyone saw them, their weapons would not raise alarm. And yet, Alyssa could not shake the feeling they were being watched, and somehow that observer knew their intent. The streets and alleys of Noxus were narrow and twisting, designed to strive and frustrate any attacking force that managed to penetrate the city's outer defenses. The rooftops were flat and serralated, like the battlements of a castle, allowing any soldiers above dominate an enemy below. Alyssa eyed those dark rooftops warily. Anyone could be up there, marking their progress. They could well be walking into an ambush. A fluttering of black wings overhead made her skid to a halt, swinging her crossbow skyward. She cursed herself for being so jumpy, and gestured her retainers on.
This is a bad idea,
Alyssa said to herself for the 20th time since leaving the estate. She had said as much to her brother, trying to dissuade him from this course of action, but his mind was set. This was their father's will. Orem had stated with finality. They would return home having secured a new deal, or they would not return at all. There was no other course. Now she had some time to digest it. Alyssa was not surprised that this was the old governor's plan all along. Of course it was. While it may well end in both her and her brother's capture and subsequent execution, what was that to her father? He had never cared for either of them overmuch, saving his affections for his heir, Alyssa's oldest brother, Herok. And if they were caught and the Triferix tried to hold them as hostages to keep the Delverhold within the rule of Noxus, she knew what her father's answer would be. To him, Alyssa and Orem were expendable. She and her men hugged the shadows as they closed in on the Shrine of the Wolf, which butted up against the old southern bulwarks of the Immortal Bastion itself. Her brother would be a few streets to the east, with more of their armored retainers. In the weeks before the contingent arrived in the capital, spies in their employ had been watching the comings and goings around the palace. One of their observations had been of a particular interest, and it was upon that intelligence that Alyssa and her brother were now operating. They were getting close. Alyssa lifted a hand, and the Delverguard fell in around her, pausing in the shadows of a narrow passage looking towards the Shrine of the Wolf. It was a tall multi-tiered tower with open sides, each level held aloft by pillars of dark stone. In the center of the tower, looming almost 50 feet high, was a massive obsidian statue of a seated wolf. They waited there for a long minute, until they saw two brief flashes of light in the distance, the sparks of a blade against flint. That was the signal that Orem was in place, and the way was clear. "Let's move," Alisa hissed, and as one, she and her attendants were up and running, breaking from cover and hurrying towards the shrine, watchful for guards. There were none. It seemed her brother and his men had done their work. Alisa loped up to the steps of the shrine, indicating with a flick of her hand for her warriors to spread out. They entered, passing over the threshold and circled around the statue of the wolf. They hugged the shadows, leaning against the pillars, melding into the darkness, and waited. She gazed up. In ancient Valoran custom, death was often represented as a dualistic in nature, taking the form of the lamb of peaceful death and the wolf of violent ends. In Noxus, the latter was honored with rather more rigor and panoply. Dying peacefully in one's bed was not the way to secure honor in an empire that venerated strength. Alisa steadied her breathing, trying to slow her racing heart. Her hands were clumsy. She wiped them on her cloak. Waiting was always the worst part. She glanced around again and found herself barely able to make out her retainers. Good. If they were spotted too early, then all of this would be for naught. Alisa reached up and fastened the veil of finely wrought chainmail to her helmet, so that it hung below her eyes, obscuring her features. A distant watchtower tolled the 4th hour. Alisa readied herself. If the information from their spies was correct, the target would be approaching any moment. And, as if on cue, a heavily robed figure emerged. It came from the direction of the Immortal Bastion proper, accompanied by 4 palace guards. The lead figure was almost invisible in the pre-dawn darkness, dressed as they were, from head to toe in black. It was the 3rd member of the Triferics, the Faceless. The anonymous figure walked slowly towards the shrine, head turning from side to side as if scanning the shadows. Their hands were clasped before them, hidden beneath heavy sleeves. The guard stopped at the foot of the shrine. It appeared the Faceless conferred with them briefly, although Alisa was too far away to hear their words, before the masked figure continued on alone, seemingly to pay respects to the wolf. While warriors of the war host and the reckoners of the gladiator pits were perhaps the most frequent visitors of the various martial shrines scattered around the capital, even bureaucrats, shopkeepers and servants made frequent offerings. The Faceless, it had been observed, visited this shrine at the 4th hour every 5th day, always guarded and under the cover of darkness. Thankfully, while the loyalties of the Triferian Legion were absolute, mere palace guards could be most certainly bribed to look the other way. As the masked figure approached the great statue, Alisa stepped out of the concealing darkness. On cue, the paid-off guards turned on their heels and marched back toward the Immortal Bastion. Alisa had her crossbow leveled at the Faceless as she stepped cautiously into the flickering light of the sconces around the statue. "Don't move and don't cry out," she hissed. "Your guards are gone. 12 crossbows are aimed at you right now." The robed figure made a muffled sound, perhaps in surprise, and came a step closer to her. There was something distantly familiar about it, both in the sound and its awkward movement. "Hold, I say," said Alisa. The Faceless froze. No one in Noxus seemed to know who the 3rd member of the Triferics was. No one that Alisa or Orem had been able to find, at least. That was the strength of deception, the principle of guile represented on the Council of Three. But Alisa intended to change that. "It's all about leverage," her brother had said. "If we can learn the identity of that one, then we can use it to our advantage." "We mean you no harm," Alisa declared as boldly as she could. "Take off your mask and there will be no bloodshed." The hooded figure looked around, perhaps seeking the guards, or trying to spot the crossbowmen Alisa had spoken of, concealed in the darkness. Then the figure edged forward again, now almost within the weapon's reach, hands still hidden from view. Alisa aimed her crossbow at the figure's chest. "Don't take another step." The figure made another muffled sound, shaking the mask emphatically. Alisa narrowed her eyes. Then she exhaled slowly as the realization crept over her. That makes things easier. She pulled the trigger, and her bolt took the robed figure in the throat. One of her retinue was at her side in an instant, urging her to run. "We have to go," he said. "We have to be out the city before sunrise. before anyone knows what has happened." "It's already too late," Alisa answered. She knelt beside the figure, now gasping on the ground. Blood was pooling beneath the body. Alisa had seen enough wounds in her time to know this one was fatal. She reached out and pulled the mask free. Oram stared up at her. Her brother's face was pallid, his eyes wild, and a gag had been stuffed in his mouth. He jerked and twitched as death came for him. The movements pulled his sleeves back, revealing his hands bound tightly together with cord. In his last moment, his gaze shifted from Alisa to the massive statue of the wolf looming over them. It was then that the legionnaires arrived, lopping out of the darkness like hunting hounds, to surround the shrine. The sun was high in the cloudless sky outside, sending angled beams of light through the narrow-slit windows into the audience chamber. Alisa stood before the Triferix once more, her head held high, wrists manacled behind her back. The members of the council regarded her carefully. The inscrutable masked face of the Faceless was, to Alisa in the moment, perhaps the most intimidating of the three. It was Swain who finally broke the silence.
"Let me speak plainly," he said. "The Delverhold is of great value to Noxus, but not so valuable that we would acquiesce to the demands and threats of its governor. That would be a signal of weakness. Within the week, a dozen other provinces would be lining up with the demands of their own. No, that was never going to happen. But you already knew that."
"I did," said Alisa. "My brother clearly didn't."
"Then it might make lesser minds wonder. Why would an intelligent young woman such as yourself go along with such an obvious and clumsy scheme?"
"Duty," Alisa replied.
"Duty to the Empire must always overshadow duty to family,"
said Swain. Alisa might have imagined it, but she thought she saw Darius's expression darken very slightly at those words. Even so, the hand of Noxus held his tongue. "I agree entirely," said Alisa, "which is the reason when I realized it was my brother under the mask, I shot him." Swain turned towards the masked Faceless.
"A risky gambit, to gag and disguise your captive. There were other ways we might have tested her."
He turned back to Alisa.
"Indulge me, please. For the benefit of my fellow council members, why would you knowingly shoot and kill your brother?"
"My father sent us here to die," Alisa replied, "and would have used our deaths to justify closing the gates of the Delverhold to Noxus."
"Go on."
"My father and my brothers are fools. They had been blinded by their desires to rule the Iron Spike Mountains as kings once more, as our forebears did. They would lead my people to their doom for such a fleeting vanity." The merest hint of an icy smile turned the corner of Swain's mouth.
"So then, Alisa Roshka Gloriana Valokan, what would you propose instead?"
The aging governor Valokan looked up, an expression of pure outrage upon his face, as Alisa threw open the doors to his study chamber. "What is this, girl?" he snarled, raising to his feet. "You return unannounced? Where's Oram?" Striding behind her were two warriors of the Trifarian Legion, imposing and ominous in their dark iron spike armor, halberds at the ready. Beside her father was her brother Herok, heir to the Delverhold. His eyes were wide and fearful. "Guards!" the governor shouted. "Stop them!" His personal guard, however, made no move to intervene. The reputation of the Legion was known throughout Valoran, even amongst those who had never fought beside or against them. They marched with the authority of the Hand of Noxus. To defy them would be to defy the Triferix itself. Alisa had thought much about the words Darius had spoken, those words that her brother had scoffed at.
"Just two of the Trifarian Legion could walk in and take your precious Delverhold."
It had been proved to be no idle boast after all. "What have you done?" her father hissed, sinking back into his chair. What was needed? Alisa produced a rolled parchment, freshly written and stamped with the crest of Noxus, the crest of the Triferix, and slammed it down on the table before her father, making him jump. "On the order of the Grand General, I am removing you from office," said Alisa. "Henceforth, I shall govern this place, for the good of the Empire." "You!" her father scoffed. "A woman has never ruled the Delverhold." "Then perhaps it is time that changed. It is time for someone who will look to the future of our people, and not obsess about the kings and faded glory of the past." Alyssa nodded and her father's own guard stepped forward, grabbing hold of him. "You can't do this!" he screeched. "I am your lord!" "You are no lord," said Alyssa, "especially not mine." And that was The Principles of Strength by Anthony Reynolds. I love how every story Riot releases has an awesome twist that feels like a plot twist from a book. This story felt like a scene ripped from Game of Thrones. I loved every second of it as I tried to figure out where all these hints were leading. In the end, a brilliant story to set up a new place in the universe. But sadly, that's it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to rate it and subscribe for more lore and news. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Discord if you'd like to chat. We are streaming pretty often, so check out our Twitch too. Merch and P.O. Box will be in the description. Of course, massive shout out to our patrons for going the extra mile. You guys are absolutely the best. And with that, thank you all so much for watching and for your support, I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again.